From their time in Valinor till the end of the Second Age, the Noldor were ruled by 6 different High Kings. But after the death of Gil-galad during the War of the Last Alliance, the Noldor did not crown a new king, and instead were nominally ruled by Lord Elrond Half-Elven from his refuge of Rivendell. Elrond was the vice-regent of Gil-galad. He was descended from the House of Fingolfin, and he was highly intelligent and experienced. So that begs the question, why didn't Elrond become High King of the Noldor? The first and foremost reason was that there weren't enough Noldor left to justify the crowning of a new king. At the end of the First Age, many Noldor still chose to remain in Middle-earth, including prominent Noldor such as Gil-galad, Galadriel, and Celebrimbor. For this reason, a Noldoran kingdom was ruled from the land of Lindon, although there were also populations of Sindar and Nandor present. At the height of his power, High King Gil-galad ruled a realm which extended from the shores of the sea to the Brandywine River, as well as a vassal realm in Eregion that would be ruled by Celebrimbor. But the situation was entirely different by the end of the Second Age. Eregion had been destroyed during the War of the Elves and Sauron, and its remaining survivors either dwelled in the refuge of Rivendell or in the Sindar-ruled realm of Lothlorien. Many elves who survived the war set sail into the west, and although Gil-galad continued to rule a powerful realm, he and many other Noldor were killed during the War of the Last Alliance. Moving into the Third Age, it was quite clear that the twilight years of the elves were truly underway, especially that of the Noldor, and the exodus into the west began to accelerate. So in the Third Age, the Noldoran population has dwindled significantly, and it's scattered between several different realms. Elrond rules over the Noldor in Rivendell, but the bulk of the Noldor probably remained in Lindon, now under the lordship of Círdan the Shipwright, and there were also Noldor dwelling in Lothlorien under King Amroth. Even if these Noldor congregated in one place, they would still be few in number, even compared to the Sindar or the Sylvan Elves. So if Elrond claimed the title of High King of the Noldor, it would largely be honorific in nature, and wouldn't come with any more power than Elrond already had as Lord of Rivendell. And nothing in Elrond's nature suggests that he would be interested in claiming titles simply out of vanity. The second reason is a little more complex. Many view Elrond as the natural successor to Gil-galad. Like I said earlier, he was Gil-galad's right-hand man, he was descended from previous kings of the Noldor, he was raised by Noldor, and he looked like a Noldor. But interestingly enough, if you look at Elrond's genealogy, he's less Noldoran than you might think. In fact, in terms of bloodline, he's not very Noldoran at all. Elrond is half-elven, and although he chose to be of the race of elves, he doesn't belong to a specific elven group. However, at the time of Elrond's birth, his parents, Eärendil and Elwing, were of the race of men, as the Valar had not yet given half-elves the ability to choose their own race. His maternal grandparents were Nimloth and Dior. Nimloth was Sindar, and Dior was half-elven, his parents being Beren, a Beorian man, and Lúthien, who was half Sindar, half Maiar. His paternal grandparents were Tuor and Idril. Tuor was a Hadorian man, and although Idril was Noldor and daughter of King Turgon, her mother was of the Vanya. Given that only one of his grandparents was Noldoran, and even then she was only half Noldoran, Elrond doesn't actually have much Noldoran blood running through his veins. That doesn't mean he wouldn't be accepted as High King of the Noldor. Like I said earlier, he was practically Noldor. He looked the part, spoke the part, acted the part, and was raised by the Noldor. You know, if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it is probably a duck. Elrond was highly respected, so despite his interesting bloodline, I don't think his claim would have been rejected had he pressed it. But even though his claim might not have been rejected by other elves, it's possible that Elrond did not think of himself as a legitimate successor to Gil-galad. It's possible that he did not believe he had the right to make such a claim, and was therefore content with remaining as the Lord of Rivendell. And while I'm on the topic of Elrond's bloodline, I want to talk about something interesting. So Elrond has dark hair and grey eyes, which are the classical Noldoran physical traits. But funnily enough, it's almost impossible that Elrond inherited his Noldoran looks from his Noldoran bloodline, as both of his paternal grandparents were blonde-haired. In fact, Elrond likely inherited these looks from his maternal great-grandparents, Beren and Lúthien, who both had dark hair and grey eyes. They would pass these looks down to Dior, who would then pass them down to Elwing, who was Elrond's mother. Fun fact. The third reason is mostly for comedic value, but it still stands. every High King of the Noldor died horribly. Finwë was murdered by Morgoth, Feanor was mortally wounded by Balrogs and later died, Fingolfin got crushed to death by Morgoth, Fingon got beaten to death by Balrogs, Turgon had a tower fall on his head, and Gil-galad was burned to death by Sauron's hand. Even non-High Kings such as Finrod and Orodreth still died violently. There were no abdications or peacefully sailing into the west, only death. So in conclusion, Elrond might have looked at all of his potential predecessors and realised they all had one thing in common, and then decided, actually, I kind of want to live. So these are some of the likely and or possible reasons for Elrond choosing not to become High King of the Noldor after the death of Gil-galad. The Noldor were too few and were scattered across the westlands of Middle-earth, so there was no point in really having a king. Elrond himself, despite displaying many Noldoran characteristics, was actually of very limited Noldoran heritage. And finally, if Elrond became High King, he probably would have suffered a horrific death at some point, and can we really begrudge a man for wanting to live? Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least found it interesting. Yes, I may have actually refreshed my memory on how dominant and recessive genes worked when determining where Elrond got his looks from. Tolkien may have never given Elwing's hair colour, but science tells us that it was almost certainly dark. Take that, Tolkien. Cheers, thanks again, and remember, Tolkien used High King instead of Emperor because he hated the French.